gunman has been taken down. We're going to get right into this.
Well, and we are also now joining us now by phone is Chief Congressional Correspondent Chad Pergram. He had been following this breaking news story and has all the details on what happened. We're so grateful, Chad, we have you by phone. Can you break this down for us?
Well, Tommy, this is what always happens when we have something like this. I always start to check in on the security situation at the White House, but this is what happened around 6 o'clock this evening. I'm told that a gunman came up near the White House on the west side, what is described to be as Gate 17. This is kind of near 14th Street on the west side of the White House, and came up and brandished some sort of a pistol. We don't know what type of pistol it was, but he then fired toward the White House 3 times, and the United States Secret Service, they returned fire. We don't know how many shots that they got off. And they apparently took the gunman down. Now, sometime in this gunfire exchange, a civilian on the street was struck by this gunfire, and we do not know the condition of that person right now. But the important thing to know is that the gunman who came up with the pistol and was taken down by the Secret Service, and we don't know his condition right now, but he never got inside the perimeter of the White House. And this is according to a senior administration official with direct knowledge of what went down at the White House this afternoon. This was right around 6 o'clock Eastern time.
So, Chad, so if I'm hearing what you say correctly, this was somebody who was just firing in the direction of the White House?
It was something that the Secret Service obviously perceived as a threat. Obviously, we're told that that gunfire apparently was directed toward the White House. If you get toward the west side of the White House, and we're trying to figure out precisely where this was, you have the old executive office building, now called the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, which is kind of a big complex if you're working from west to east toward the White House. So we know that he was firing in the direction of the White House, and this is the preliminary report from someone who's very senior and would have direct knowledge of this information. Again, a lot of people in town, there was one source that had, questioned me earlier before we had this information. There's a lot of motorcyclists in town for the Memorial Day events. They always come up at this time, and people thought it might have been, motorcyclists backfiring or something like that. There's quite a cacophony of that. But this is clearly someone who came up and was firing at the direction of the White House. And the president, of course, is at the White House today.
Hey, Chad, Kevin here. If I could just get you to break down again, based on what you've heard, this person was taken down. Does that mean they had been neutralized, or do you think they sort of made physical contact with this person? I'm just trying to get some clarity there.
I was told that they were shot because the Secret Service returned fire against this individual.
Gotcha. And have you heard from any cabinet secretaries or any other high-level officials about what's happening?
Yeah, this is all we've got right now. It's Memorial Day weekend. People are spread to the 4 winds, and the reason I, always jump in on this is that, I used to cover local government, and the best stories about the county sheriff's department will come out through the county commissioners and vice versa. So when you cover Congress and something's happening in the administration, a lot of times you check in there. But I was also checking to make sure there wasn't some sort of a threat at the Capitol as well, and this led me down this road here. Now, again, to reiterate to our audience, this is what we have at this point. This is very preliminary and fragmentary. So around 6 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon, you had a gunman who came up near what is known at the Capitol as Gate 17. This is the outer perimeter around the White House. It's a rainy day in Washington. I was downtown today. Not as many people in downtown Washington as you typically have on a Memorial Day weekend, simply because of all the weather. Very, very chilly for this time of year here. He came up on the west side of the Capitol, and he brandished a pistol and started to fire in the direction of the White House. And he was about at least 3 shots, we're told, and the United States Secret Service returned fire, took him down, and there was a civilian somewhere on the street who was struck by this gunfire. We don't know by whose gunfire right now. But again, to emphasize here, he never got in the general perimeter inside the White House. And when you're looking at the orientation here, you can see in the ambulance in the video going by here, the Eisenhower Executive Office Building is just up the street from that. So this happened kind of down, I would estimate, from the southwest corner of where that was at this stage.
Hey, Chad, it's Alicia Cunha here. You mentioned that you covered local politics and law enforcement there. So I'm curious, when we saw the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, there was an immediate coming to the cameras by not only the president, but also
by members of law enforcement. This is a different situation here. What do you anticipate in terms of communication by law enforcement as the evening goes on? Are we going to hear from anyone? It's not really like the Secret Service, is it, that would come up and give a press conference?
Well, we wouldn't know directly, but since the Secret Service did, in fact, fire, according from these reports, it would seem that they would probably comment at some point in some format, be that on X or social media or something else. I would be, expect that the, DC police might be involved. Did they know something about this suspect, or was there some, behavior observed? There's a lot of cameras around the White House, and so they might be able to track this person's movement. You also have the police that work with the transit authority in Washington, D.C. Did he come out of the subway somewhere, the metro, or something like that? So these are the types of things that they will go back to start to evaluate. But primarily, I would presume that this is a Secret Service issue, but also just the fact that it's at the White House. And let me give you some context here. What this immediately reminded me of was that you had a gunman who came up to the White House, and this is where history is often our guide, in October of 1994. It was again a Saturday afternoon. It was a nicer day, I remember that, and came up, and he was on the other side across from Lafayette Park, the side that you always see kind of the beauty shot.
Yeah,
of the
this
White
happened
House
today.
from that side. And
This happened today at 6:50 on 6:30 this afternoon here in Washington, D.C.
Where the press room is. Now, this was a different situation. Again, this was somebody who had come up there, in 1994. But that's what this struck me as similar in terms of the fact that it was Saturday afternoon, and the White House, gunfire being directed in the general direction of the White House.
Chad, Tom Shalhoub. So
This
we
happened
were
today.
looking at social media when this first came out. We heard 30 shots fired. You mentioned it sounds like about 3 shots max from the shooter, and we're assuming the rest of those shots came from Secret Service. In your experience, how many guns are right there available? If a shooter opens fire at the White House, is there many guns that are able to be trained on them?
Absolutely. I mean, you have snipers, you have people all over the place. This is one of the most heavily fortified facilities in the United States. Again, I cover Congress. I walk into the Capitol every day, and I probably pass anywhere just on a routine day 10 to 15 officers, and they're all armed, and these aren't even the heavily armed officers. The White House is fortified in a different way. So yeah, I mean, that's where you might get up in that number until, according to my source, that this suspect was taken down pretty quickly. And again, as I say, there are other police forces in that area of Washington, D.C., the Metro Transit Police, Washington, D.C. Police, Capitol Police are not very far, George Washington University Police. You might have, if it's something that's just off the White House grounds, a Convergence Park Police, National Park Service is not very far. The National Mall, you might have a lot of people jumping into this depending on what the request might be or what officers see and hear.
And Chad, this also for me harkens back to, again, not too long ago when we had somebody show up at Mar-a-Lago, perhaps in a similar fashion to this. You mentioned the security presence and posture around the White House. One would expect it would be one of the most secure areas in the world, certainly in the country. So if somebody was in the vicinity and they're just shooting off, they had to have understood that they weren't going to get that close to the White House. I mean, for someone to do that and just shoot in the general direction, they had to have known that there would be a response pretty quickly. This couldn't have been somebody who thought they were getting the element of surprise here. It doesn't sound like someone very strategic.
Well, that's where I talked about what happened in 1994. This person just opened up fire on the White House on the other side. That was a completely different situation. I mean, you have had incidents down the White House where the threat has not been toward the facility itself or the President of the United States himself, where you've had local crime. In Washington, D.C., you might remember when President Obama was in office, and it took them quite a while to figure this out. There had been what was alleged to be, gunfire, gun activity by gangs downtown. And I remember the Secret Service director testified that said, well, we don't know what it was. And they found out later that there had been, and this was found by a White House housekeeper, that there was a window that was broken at the White House in the Obama residence portion of the building. And I remember our colleague Trey Gowdy at the time, he was congressman from South Carolina, and he was on the oversight committee when hearing, they said, well, she said, well, it was hard to see and everything. And he famously said in the hearing, can you hear at night? Meaning that it doesn't matter whether or not there was a direct threat toward the president, and they divined later that they were trying to shoot at the White House and were trying to attack the president of the United States in the case of Barack Obama. And they just kind of dismissed this as, casual gunfire in the area, as much as one can dismiss casual gunfire in downtown Washington, D.C. near the White House. And people said, we don't care what it was. This is near the White House. There should be a better response. And certainly in this case, if there was a threat, or even if it wasn't, we don't know the motives of the suspect here, they certainly were able to neutralize him quickly. And that was not the case when you had this threat with the Obamas, and one of the windows was actually broken then. And it took them weeks, maybe months, to figure out that this was actually an attempt to kill the president of the United States.
If you're just joining us, you are looking at live pictures just outside the White House. It is on lockdown. This is very likely 17th Street, which is on the western side of the White House. You see Secret Service activity right there. Reports of gunfire. In fact, there are some reports online. We've seen video of some of the people who were actually reporting at the time of the gunfire. We are being joined by our chief congressional correspondent, Chad Pergram. Chad, if you would recap for the folks who are just joining us, what you know and what might be happening even now as we continue to watch these pictures.
Right, and the first thing that we've gotten in here from the Secret Service, you were asking me a few minutes ago about, who might put something out, that the Secret Service just a bit ago put out a statement saying, quote, we are aware of reports of shots fired near 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, and we are working to corroborate the information with personnel on the ground. Additional information will be provided as it becomes available. So to the viewers just tuning in right now, what we have here, around 6 o'clock Eastern time, there was, you can hear people on the ground there. I wasn't there, but there was a report of gunfire near the White House. And I jumped in here because sometimes, when there's a threat at the White House or the executive branch, maybe there's something going on at the Capitol. So I started to dial into the sources there. We're told that this was on the west side of the White House grounds. Again, you have the White House, and you also have the outer perimeter there, Gate 17, as it was described to me, near the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Somebody came up and brandished some sort of a pistol. I'm told that it was a pistol, in fact, not a long gun or a rifle or anything like that. And the alleged gunman got off at least 3 shots, and the United States Secret Service, who obviously prowl that area, some things might not be obvious to people walking by, but certainly to the people, guarding the perimeter, they responded to this. They're trained to respond to that gunfire. And I'm told, and this was the quote that was given to me, that they took the suspect down. Quote, they took him down. So this is a male suspect. I'm also told that somewhere in this process that a civilian was struck. We don't know how many shots that the Secret Service or other law enforcement might have gotten off. Again, they'll have to go through the ballistics evidence of this, and we don't know the condition of the gunman or the suspect. But the important thing here is that the President of the United States is safe, and that the alleged gunman never got inside the White House perimeter.
Introducing the Spectracide Wasp Hornet and Yellow Jacket Trap. With a lure that's impossible to resist. It's your refillable tool.
You begged for me to let you die.
This
You did
happened
not.
today in Washington, D.C.
Chad, it's Alicia again. As we're watching some of these videos pop up on social media, it's hard not to be hit with watching people do live shots and then get interrupted and duck from gunfire. There was another reporter I saw.
We had some people out there on the ground
The look on her face when
when all this stuff was going on.
I don't know if you were at the White House Correspondents' Dinner that night, but all of us, so many of us will never forget watching all of those people, all of these reporters. It's starting to feel a little dangerous just to be out by the White House or to be in the proximity of the White House and its occupants if you're a reporter.
Well, that's something that's concerned me for years. I've covered, Congress for, several decades now. I remember when, it's just not the White House, it's those of us, who report on the Capitol as well. I remember when the 2 Capitol police officers were shot and killed in 1998, certainly 9/11. You had a guy come up just a few weeks after January 6th in April of 2021 and ram the north barricade at the Capitol and severely injure one officer and kill another. The baseball practice shooting Alexandria, Virginia. I was there pretty quickly. This happens over and over and over again in different formats. Whether you were at the White House or whether you were at the Capitol. In fact, I called a White House reporter, somebody who's a friend. So I don't know them unbelievably well. The day after the correspondence dinner, I was not there, and I had indicated, I said, hey, I've been through this.
It's happening there in Washington, D.C. And the
so
guy
this
was
is something
taken
that is
down,
starting to be
shots
common
fired at
denominator
White
among
House.
those of us who cover these installations in Washington, D.C. and also in that would be at the Capitol, the White House. I wrote an essay some years ago, and it was on our website, where I characterized some of what we do. We're kind of like war correspondents, frankly. We don't go to the Middle East or Asia or something like that, but here on Capitol Hill or covering a baseball practice for the Republican baseball team or whatever, these things happen, and it's terribly, rattling to have this happen over and over and over again. And I think that, the seminal question here, again, we don't know the motives of this gunman here, but was asked by Peter Doocy the night of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He said to President Trump, why does this continue to happen to you? Why do you think that happens? There have been multiple attempts on the president's life. Again, we don't know what was happening here, but, again, letting history be our guide, we know what happened at the White House in 1994. That was during the Clinton administration that I talked about a few minutes ago. We know what happened, that there was, shots fired into the residence of the White House when President Obama was in office. So we've had these types of things happen. It's just part of, it's very reflective of the society in which we live right now and where we are with our government and history.
Well, and Chad, we know President Trump has been so dedicated to making DC a safer place, just in all respects, so that people can enjoy being out and about in DC. Obviously, this could be something very different, but it all goes hand in hand in terms of safety. Social media, unfortunately, when something like this happens, social media goes wild. There's a lot of speculation, people trying to be first to report things, and oftentimes it's untrue. We're seeing a lot on social media, 20 to 30 shots fired. I believe Kevin mentioned that earlier. From your sources and your official sources, it doesn't sound like
crazy.
your sources are saying there were
Memorial
that
Day
many
weekend
shots
too.
fired. Can you clarify for our audience that
was a
might
good
also
thing. A
be
lot of
on
people
social
wasn't out
media?
there today because of the rain.
I mean, they were.
It could have got real ugly.
We said that people had thought they had heard, 20 to 30 shots. That we just don't know yet. The only concrete number I have been given was that there were 3 shots, and that was fired by the gunman himself, not the Secret Service. We don't know what they shot here. And just since we've been on the air in the past couple of minutes here, I've been told here, and this is from the Washington D.C. police, the Metropolitan Police, they are saying the Secret Service is working an incident in the intersection of 17th and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. Please avoid the area. So that's all we know right now. But again, the only concrete number, and this will probably change. Once they figure out, okay, what caliber of weapon he had, how many shots, was he capable of getting off? Did he actually get that many off? Sometimes they'll actually find with the casings or whatever it is. This is what happens in the investigation. But that was a distinct number they gave me of 3 shots that were fired by this alleged perpetrator. But we don't know how much, fire was returned by the Secret Service.
Chad, I think one of the things we're going to be most curious about is the person who's described as a bystander or a civilian. I assume that there's some type of protocol that we're going to have to wait to hear based on identification, notifying family if the person is hurt or fatal. Is that to be expected, that it might be some time coming before we know who that is?
Well, if they took them down, one would think, and we saw at least some video there, that there was an ambulance driving away from the scene towards Washington University Hospital. Is not very far from the scene there. That's where President Reagan was famously shot, where he was taken after he was shot during the assassination attempt in 1981 when he was shot at the Hilton, which is where the White House Correspondents' Dinner was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But if there was a civilian who was injured, in fact, we don't know what the degree of the injuries are there, or certainly the alleged gunman, then that's probably where they might have taken them. I might also say, depending on one's injuries, that MedStar, which is in Washington, D.C., which is kind of in the center of the city and not far, that is a level 1 trauma center in the District of Columbia. And in fact, depending on one's injuries, that's where where Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip, that's where they took him from Alexandria, Virginia, across the river because of his injuries were so serious. So again, depending on things, that might be employed as well in terms of where they might take it.
Chad, thank you so much for giving us all of those details. You're definitely our go-to. We appreciate you being on the phone. Joining us now is Alex Hogan live
It's
outside of
definitely
the White
terrible.
House.
People.
Alex, what is happening on the ground right now?
Make sure y'all like, share, and subscribe. Give me those thumbs up. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Alex?
This is happening in Washington, D.C.
Perhaps
Around about 6:30
we're going to
p.m.
go back to chat while Alex gets up and running. Obviously, we just spoke to her earlier on a different issue, so we're going to go back to chat, who is luckily still on the phone for us. Chat.
You know, I noticed something. If I could jump in here really quickly, Tommy. Right now, we're looking at a picture. Again, this is probably I Street, just to the northwest of where most people walk in, Chad, along Pennsylvania Avenue. And I mention that because, you know, the National Guard shooting occurred literally right along this same street, right around this same area. And again, I think it speaks to, and I will be fair. I think, thank goodness, since the National Guard has come to town, things are clearly safer. They not just feel safer; they are safer. And yet, you will.
Yeah,
have
I guess that's what. I guess that's how they think it too. I guess they want Trump over there so bad that they just doing anything.
Again,
They said he was at the White House today also.
What can happen in a large city like Washington, but it's obviously heightened. In particular, when we know the president has just gotten back to the White House not that long ago. We have these high-level
They definitely said he was
meetings
at the White House
happening with
today.
Iranians. There are a number of different ways you might interpret what has
He might
happened
be taking
today.
bets.
Okay.
Chad, can you hear me?
Yes, I got you there, Kevin. I'm sorry, we were having a little bit of a technical issue here. Pose the last bit of your question to me again, please.
Yeah, not a problem. I was just saying, especially when you consider the pictures we're looking at right now, this is the northwest side of the complex along 17th. You'll recall the Secret Service, or make that the National Guard shooting occurred not terribly far from what we're looking at in terms of these pictures. And yet, while D.C. is demonstrably safer, now that we have the National Guard in town, it doesn't mean a city like D.C. is immune to circumstances like this.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things they'll have to, parse out. That, was this, in fact, something that was directed, at the president, at the White House? You're looking at that kind of, mall building there. Those are offices of the executive branch there. Further in the distance with the flagpole at the top. That's the Eisenhower Executive Office building. So you're right in that complex, and you do have quote regular crime that happens in this, in downtown D.C. And that's where I remember there've been several of these incidents over the years.
This is what they say they got fake news, but this ain't fake news. It's real news.
One wonders if maybe they were more aggressive and more attuned to this, as maybe they should be, considering the threats to the president, considering what happened at the White House dinner, just a couple of weeks ago, consider what happened, at Mar-a-Lago, considering what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, and as you cite, and we see them here on the screen right now, Kevin, these are, members of the National Guard there who've been brought in to help make D.C. a little safer. Yes, there is crime in downtown urban areas all over the country here, and D.C. is no different. But again, the reaction around the government complexes and around the White House and around the Capitol, that's why, there's a little bit of a different security posture here right now.
Hey, Chad, it's Alicia again. So I've been to DC a handful of times. I've seen the outside of the White House as a tourist, but I've never been there as a reporter. So I don't know the area very well, and I'm sure there are Americans all over the country who don't know this particular block very well. You talk about office complexes and such, and the security posture right now. Do people live there? Like, do normal people live right around in this area, or is it just offices and law enforcement and very official?
It's not as residential in that immediate area, the few blocks there. But if you were to go just to the west there, if you were, say, at the Eisenhower Executive Office building and going west, you start to get into some apartments there. You certainly get into where some students live in dormitories for George Washington University. But you're in pretty much downtown D.C. And there are more apartments if you were to go further to the east, further to the west. But that area there's not much. There's law offices, there's some businesses, there's lobbying firms, there's the famous K Street, which is not far from down the street. You get in a couple of blocks to Constitution Avenue, the National Mall. Again, it's rainy, chilly this time of year right now in Washington, D.C., but there's a lot of people in town for Memorial Day. Memorial Day concert at the Capitol, always a big deal. A lot of people come in. You have the motorcycles that always come in this time of year. I saw a number of them today driving around the city who come in for the Vietnam and remembering our fallen heroes in the United States. And so, a lot of this is happening not far from where some
So
of those
the White House is
people
on lockdown.
are certainly in this area. In fact, I had coffee with a friend today who was staying at a hotel. We weren't that far from this location right here, to be frank.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on
That's real
YouTube,
talk.
and catch full shows streaming now on Fox.